of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. Pursuant to the standing orders, members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. I would like to make a few comments for the benefit of witnesses and members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. To prevent disruptive audio feedback incidents during our meeting, we kindly ask that all participants keep their earpieces away from their microphone. Audio feedback incidents can seriously injure interpreters and disrupt our proceedings. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. Pursuant to the motion adopted by the committee October 23, 2023, the committee commences its study of the mandate and priorities of the Minister of Public Safety. With us today, appearing Honourable Dominic LeBlanc, Minister of Public Safety, Democratic Institutions and Intergovernmental Affairs. Witnesses, Canada Border Service Agency, Ted Gallivan, Executive Vice President. Canadian Security Intelligence Services, David Vino, Director. Correctional Service of Canada, Ann Kelly, Commissioner. Department of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness, Tricia Geddes, Associate Deputy Minister. Parole Board of Canada, Jennifer Oates, Chairperson. Royal Canadian Mounted Police, Michael Duhame, Commissioner. So please note that the Minister will be with us for the first hour. Remaining officials will answer questions from members for the second hour. Welcome to all. I now invite Minister LeBlanc to make an opening statement.
Mr. Chair, thank you. Good morning, colleagues. Thank you for inviting me to appear before the committee. Today, as your chair noted, I am joined by the deputy heads of the Department of Public Safety, the Correctional Service of Canada, the Parole Board of Canada, Canadian Border Services Agency, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and the Canadian Security Intelligence Services. Some of the women and men who are with me this morning are tasked with defending our borders, keeping our communities safe, and protecting our country from threats posed by foreign adversaries. Now, Mr. Chair, I was looking at the horsepower from the department here with me at the table. I hope something doesn't go wrong in the country for the next couple of hours, because the women and men who are tasked with keeping our country safe are sitting with me, with you this morning. Mr. Chair, today I will speak to a few priorities that highlight the substantial progress that I believe our government has made together with parliamentarians to keep Canada safe.
We have increased maximum sentences for firearms trafficking and provided law enforcement agencies with the tools they need to better investigate these crimes. We have codified a national freeze on the sale, purchase, and transfer of handguns. We have introduced new criminal provisions to target ghost weapons and 3D printing of weapons, making Canada a leader in cracking down on this criminal trend. Propose new measures to deal with the risks associated with firearms in situations of domestic violence and gender-based violence.
Bail to make it more onerous for repeat violent offenders to be released. I think it's important to note that this was a moment where parliamentarians came together in collaboration with First Ministers across the country and premiers. I had a number of conversations, for example, with Premier Ford of Ontario, and I think this was a good example of our federation and our parliament working well together. We've expanded the security infrastructure program to provide additional funding to upgrade the safety of community gathering places. We've advanced legislation to provide expanded civilian review of the RCMP and, for the first time ever, ensure civilian review of the CBSA. We've invested in the RCMP to increase their investigative capacity and to ensure better cooperation with communities that are most at risk of being targeted by harassment and intimidated by foreign actors. And I'm hopeful that we can continue to make investments in these important public safety institutions as well. And we've put forward, as you know, Mr. Chair, cybersecurity legislation, which this committee has been working on to strengthen the resiliency and coordination of Canada's critical infrastructure.
We've consulted Canadians on amendments to the Canadian Security Intelligence Service Act to ensure that Canada's national security agencies are empowered to share threat intelligence with more Canadian partners than the federal government, and that CSIS has modernized powers to adequately protect Canadians and Canadian institutions in a digital world. And I do hope to have the opportunity very soon to work with parliamentarians on this issue. The federal government recently convened industry, police services, provinces, and territories to strengthen collaboration in the fight, the worrisome fight against rising vehicle theft, and to complement the efforts of our national security and law enforcement agencies. We are also continuing to make investments that help combat violent extremism and address harms such as hate and gender-based violence.
There is much more to do to ensure the safety of Canadians and our communities. This is a constant effort, and the women and men who joined me this morning, as I said in my opening comments, are at the front line of doing this important work with thousands of others of women and men who work with them every day. I look forward to continuing to work, I hope, in a collaborative way with this committee, and I look forward to your continued advice and engagement as you work with all of these people to keep our borders, our communities, and our institutions safe and secure. And with that, Mr. Chair, you can't imagine how excited I am to take your questions.
Thank you, Minister. And we're going to move right into questioning. Mr. Shipley, you're up first, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Minister, and hopefully that excitement continues for the next hour. Thank you, Chair, and to all the witnesses and Minister for being here this morning. Minister, I'll start off with you, please. Canadians and victims of crimes are outraged that you and your government, without consultation with victims, families, has allowed the likes of Paul Bernardo, Luca Magnotta, Michael Rafferty, and Russell Williams, some of our worst offenders in Canadian history, to live out their days comfortably in medium security prison. Why are you and your government putting the rights of violent, heinous offenders ahead of the rights of victims?
Mr. Chair, through you to Mr. Shipley, thank you for the question. Obviously, the concerns of victims and the rights of victims are at the center of every action our government would take in this most difficult space. My colleagues will know very well that the decision around the transfers of individual inmates, there are 13,500 approximately people serving time in federal penitentiaries. The transfer of these inmates is made by independent professional public servants on a series of criteria, the most important of which, of course, is community safety. The Correctional Service always works with identified victims in these circumstances, and I have faith that they will make the right decisions, including to keep, obviously, communities safe when these transfers happen.
Minister, with all due respect, your government sets the policies and directives that allow for violent offenders to be downgraded from maximum security prisons. The Canadian correction system is your responsibility, and you must take responsibility for this failure and answer to Canadians. Do you have anything to add to that?
The transfer of inmates from, as I said, maximum, for example, to medium security institutions is something that's gone on for a long time. I think it's instructive to note, Mr. Chair, that the highest number of these transfers from maximum to medium security occurred in 2012, 2013, when 291 inmates were transferred, and in 2013, 2014, 319 of these offenders were transferred. So this is not new, Mr. Chair, that the Correctional Service, in their professional judgment, applying criteria, the most important of which, of course, is community safety, makes these decisions. And I think it's a bit disingenuous to pretend that this is something new, or to pretend that an elected minister should be the one deciding where individual inmates serve their sentences in the federal system.
Thank you, Minister. I believe the past is the past, and we're here to make new legislations and move forward. People are concerned nowadays, and I don't understand the laughter. This is a very serious issue. Minister, members on your side are laughing over this issue. Canadians are upset. Minister, we know that the costly carbon tax is negatively impacting the budgets of police services, particularly due to the increased cost of heating and fueling policing facilities, detachments, and vehicle fleets. Millions of taxpayer dollars a year are being spent on the carbon tax instead of stopping crime. Will you send a clear message of support to our hardworking police officers across the country and spike the hike on April 1st?
It may come as a surprise to you, Mr. Chair, but I support our government's carbon pricing regime. I think it invests, puts more money into the pockets of 8 out of 10 Canadians, as we know well. My colleague uses the line spike the hike. We'll hear it probably later today in question period. I would expect a number of times, so it's good to start the day with that phrase very early in the morning. But I think Canadians expect, including people who work for police services, you somehow made the bridge from budgets of police officers to climate change to carbon pricing. I would assume that the men and women who serve in national security and police organizations across the country are also concerned about climate change. In many cases, these people are on the front lines of some of the most dangerous events caused by climate change. So I have every confidence they understand that the government is pursuing an appropriate course of action.
Thank you, Minister. I'll give my last bit of time to MP Motts.
Thank you, Minister. The OPP Commissioner, the Deputy Chief of Peel Regional Police, the Deputy Chief of Toronto Police, and the Chief of Laval have come to this committee and told us that the lack of meaningful penalties for auto thefts and the revolving door of the quick release on bails have made the auto theft crisis even worse. So specifically, Deputy Chief Johnson of Toronto noted that almost 50% of all offenders that they apprehend for auto thefts are repeat offenders. Minister, will you acknowledge that your government's bail policies are directly contributing to the auto theft crisis in this country and implement stiffer penalties on repeat violent offenders?
Mr. Chair, through you to Mr. Motts, thank you for that question. It's an important question. We certainly share, I think, the concern of all people at this committee and Canadians around the alarming increase in auto theft and the increasingly violent circumstances surrounding this crime. I have spoken to many of the senior police officials that my colleague outlined. My colleague, the Minister of Justice, who would be responsible for changes, for example, to the criminal code or to bail legislation, is in a better position than I am to speak to specific legislative measures. But I think the Prime Minister, the Minister of Justice have all acknowledged that the public is understandably concerned about some of these repeat offenders who are in the context of a violent crime, an increasingly violent crime. We acknowledge that would be released after multiple convictions in this space. So we're obviously interested in looking at all appropriate measures and working with women and men that you identified who are on the front line of this important work. And I'll continue to be very involved in this issue to look for further investments. And perhaps, Mr. Chair, I know when I have to leave later this morning, my colleagues from the RCMP and the CBSA, I think, have some good news to share with the committee in terms of our increased efforts, recognizing that we can continue to do more and must continue to do more at all moments in this important issue.
Thank you, Mr. Motts. Mr. Shefke, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair, and welcome to you, Minister. And on behalf of all my constituents in Vaudreuil-Soulanges, I want to thank this incredible lineup of people that come to work every day in service to our country to help keep us safe. Minister, something that's I've been preoccupied with, and I think it's a lot of Canadians share this preoccupation, is the attacks on our democracy, on our democratic institutions, particularly by Russia and China. And this week you introduced legislation updating the Canada's Election Act, and I understand that the bill falls under your portfolio, and you've done some diligent work on this. Can you tell us how the changes proposed in the Election Act will help further safeguard our democracy from threats of foreign interference?
Mr. Chair, through you again to Mr. Shifke, thank you for the question. Is Rigaud in your constituency?
It is indeed.
Well, so I hope you mentioned your constituency, and I know the Canadian Border Services Agency, of course, has a very important facility. I'm hoping next Thursday, a week from now, to be at a graduation ceremony with the women and men at the Canadian Border Services Agency. So hopefully we'll have a chance to spend some time. If you haven't gone to Florida already Thursday before Easter, I'll be at work in your riding, Mr. Shifke. So it would be great if you could join me. You mentioned the Canada Elections Act, and yes, we worked collaboratively with our colleagues, particularly in the New Democratic Party. The Prime Minister, Mr. Singh, had made a commitment in this regard to make voting more accessible to Canadians. So things like campus voting, making mail-in ballots more accessible, adjusting the requirement around being officially a nominated candidate. That was a commitment that Mr. Singh and the Prime Minister made to Canadians. We've lived up to that commitment, we think, with the legislation introduced yesterday. But we also took advantage of that opportunity when the Elections Act is before Parliament to work with Elections Canada, for example, to benefit from the advice of our colleagues like Mr. Vigneault, who's joined us this morning. And in the second part of this morning, he perhaps could talk about some of the risk to democratic institutions posed by some of the foreign state and non-state actors that you mentioned. You mentioned two countries. Sadly, they're not alone in acting in this space in a way that we think is not helpful to our democratic institutions. So the amendments that are before you deal with things like artificial intelligence, allowing, if it was already illegal in the Canada Elections Act, to impersonate a candidate in writing in a regular print media or television ad, or to try and disrupt the electoral process. But technology has allowed many, particularly Russian intervention, but they're not alone, has allowed them to potentially threaten, for example, the ability to conduct an election or influence the outcome. So all of this was governed by the advice of our security agencies and Elections Canada. The Chief Electoral Officer had made a number of thoughtful suggestions. So we tried to incorporate those in the legislation that was tabled yesterday, and would welcome, of course, parliamentarians at the appropriate moment suggesting ways to further strengthen this legislation. But it certainly is a priority for us, and we'll continue to do everything we can in this space, recognizing that the nature of the threat evolves, and therefore so too should the legislative instruments in the hands of Elections Canada as an independent agency to enforce these rules.
Thank you, Minister. And you're right. We proudly host the CBSA training facility in my community. All of the border security officers, as well as the detector dogs, are all trained in my riding, and we're very proud of that, and we look forward to potentially hosting you next week. Monsieur le ministre, ça fait environ un mois et demi.
Mr. Minister, it's been about a month and a half since the National Summit Against Automobile Theft. What progress has been made since this summit was held? It's already been mentioned on numerous occasions in this committee that the number of your neighbors, even in our neighborhood, have had their cars stolen. What progress has been made? Thank you very much for that very important question. I also already responded to Mr. Motz, but perhaps we can have some more details about what the RCMP has done in recent weeks. So Mr. Duhem could give you more details. Thank you, Minister. It is the role of the RCMP in dealing with car theft, and this is concentrated more in the Montreal and Toronto areas. So we have the CPIC, it's a portal. We keep data on car theft, the license plates, insurance, and so forth. It's a system whereby the policing across the country can track theft. We've been able to use that database, connect it with Interpol's database. So that's 196 countries that now have access to the database of the many hundreds of cars registered in CIPIC. Now, we started this in mid-February, and more than 840 verifications of serial numbers have been conducted by our international partners, which gives rise to an alert. In our Ottawa officers and international investigators can put in requests. We've had around 100 to obtain additional information. And now we will start doing an analysis on the distribution of vehicles stolen on an international scale. Well, that's good news for for insurance companies and especially for Canadians. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Shefke.
Ms. Michaud, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Minister. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for attending. It's much appreciated. I would like to come back to your assessment, your government's assessment on the weapons and C-21. There's still a lot of work to be done. Your government announced buyback a program for prohibited weapons, and that's going back a number of years. An amnesty was put in place. And then between 2021, that was then postponed to 2023, and now it's been postponed to 30th of October 2025. And if I'm not mistaken, that date will be after the next election. And so Al indicates that if there were to be an election, we might end up with a conservative government, and we know what the Conservative Party's, allegiances are to weapons control. So turning back to this buyback program, and in 2021, the Parliamentary Budget Directorate had given estimates, and there was a first phase of $12.5 million, and they were a bit far from that figure. What are you doing, Minister? Mr. Chair, and thanks you, Madame Michaud, for the question. I share your concern regarding the Conservative Party's positions on handgun control, and we are very pleased with the work we're doing with the bloc to on C21 and to reinforce the work we're doing together for firearms control. We look forward to continuing this hard work with Ms. Michaud and others. Ms. Michaud is entirely correct. I don't think that we can wait longer than that date planned for next year for the buyback program. In fact, I expect to get details for a first phase for buying back prohibited arms that are in stores like Cabela that legally sell these firearms, and the RCMP has already taken measures to be able to do that. And I'm entirely confident that we will not have to postpone the amnesty. And I understand the difficulties with doing that once again. I'm very close to finalizing the second stage, which will be to buy back those illegal firearms from Canadian individuals. We recognize the need to do that in an orderly fashion. I understand your concern. I share your concern. And I'm nevertheless confident we're going to meet the deadlines, and I will be very pleased to keep this committee and your colleagues well informed about our progress. But I think that we're about to begin. Thank you, Minister. You talked about regulations and that you hope we'll continue to collaborate, and that's my pleasure. But you need, the opposition to put in place regulations, and I believe that the advisory committee on firearms that you wanted to put in place, your predecessor wanted to put in place, because C21 is all fair and well, but it's not excellent. It talks about future arms that don't exist yet, and there are already certain firearms on the market that are not banned under C21. So, Mr. Mendocino, your predecessor said we would strike that committee that would be able to make recommendations to make progress. And when we talked about this the first time, you had just come into this position, but you've been here for a time. How is that advisory committee progressing? Thank you for the question, Chair. Once again, I share Ms. Michaud's concerns that are well explained, and I've called on our Deputy Associate Minister about information on details. I've had informal discussions with colleagues regarding that advisory committee, and it is our intention to respect commitments we've made. We've had numerous meetings on regulations. So it is a pity that these two questions fall one after the other, because the answer is similar. We're close. We're almost there. I hope to get good news very soon. And I share your Ms. Michaud's sense of urgency. And we're not going to wait for a potential successor, to take on my position before we get this done. Thank you. That's reassuring. And now regarding the border agencies and ArriveCAN. some have proposed putting the agency under trusteeship. I wonder what you think. Is CBSA at fault here, or is it your government's bad habit of contracting everything out? Listen, the circumstances around ArriveCan are worrisome, and here again, I share the concerns of my colleagues and that of Canadians about how public funds are being used. There's investigations underway. Our CMP is involved to some extent, and I have much confidence in Ms. Gorman, who couldn't be here, but Ms. O'Gorman, in charge of CBSA, had already put in place some remedies in place to change the way this program could be managed. And so to reduce this contracting out. So measures that are put in place, I believe, will do away with instances where money has been badly managed by certain individuals. And they're my colleagues at Treasury Board and Procurement who are looking into this. This has to be done government-wide. It's not just CBSA that needs to be targeted in terms of strengthening transparency. We are hard at work, once again, to effect these changes. And we're always open to other changes when investigations are completed and we have recommendations, including from the Auditor General. Mr. Julian. Thank you very much, Chair. Thanks to our witnesses. Thanks to our Minister. Very quick in answer to Ms. Michaud, you said very soon for the buyback program and the advisory committee. So what are the timelines? Does this mean in the next 2 weeks, 4 weeks? What exactly are you talking about when you say very soon? Very good question. And again, I had informal discussions with Mr. Julian on many an occasion on this buyback program. I believe we share the objectives. I apologize for interrupting. I would like to understand the timelines. Good question. The list of ministers and deputy ministers who have made commitments on an exact timelines is long. We talked about a week or two. What does very soon mean? Is it, 4, 5 weeks? I'm not going to venture into saying 2 weeks or 3 weeks, because then if it turns out to be 4 weeks, you'll say I am off by a week. So I share your concerns, and I can reassure you, Mr. Julian, that when I know I can appear here once again, then will you be able then to talk about the details? And we can certainly discuss our schedules and is a commitment on my part. It's my pleasure.
Comments, but the Auditor General's report this week has been incredibly critical, particularly about the First Nations and Inuit policing program. And Cindy Woodhouse of the FN said that all the evidence talking about the inquiry around the James Smith Cree Nation, if a First Nations police service had been equitably funded in the James Smith Cree Nation, the tragedy could have been avoided. You have the Auditor General's report talking about the fact that there is no clear governance around the funding is not clearly tracked, and there are dozens of First Nations communities that don't have access to policing. Well, how many communities have been refused to have in place the basic police services, and what is your ministry going to do to fix what is a tragedy?
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question, and I certainly share the concerns expressed by the Auditor General and by Mr. Julian. I had an opportunity to speak with her for probably an hour to understand from her personally the work she had done, the nature of her recommendations. I appreciate that. And we've committed, obviously, to improving some of the, correcting some of the challenges that she properly identified. I look forward to working with Indigenous partners on legislation around designating an essential service and the long-term reliable funding. That's also a challenge, but recognizing her concerns around the proper management of that funding is something that we also will do. One of the challenges, and I'm learning about this long-standing frustration that Indigenous communities and provincial governments have had, is that we are necessarily in a space where we have to work with provinces and territories. I was surprised at my first meeting that provincial ministers, territorial ministers, understandably very jealously guard their jurisdiction in the administration of justice. So it makes it complicated, but it shouldn't be a barrier to achieving the results, the improvements that we want. But it does necessarily involve arriving at agreements with different provincial governments and Indigenous communities. But I certainly take the concern that Mr. Julian expressed, and he mentioned the James Smith Cree Nation. And again, that was a tragic circumstance, and we think about the horrible violence inflicted on that community. And I know my colleagues, perhaps in the second hour from the Correctional Service and the Parole Board, met with the community a couple of weeks ago and can speak to those specific items. I just didn't want to miss the fact that you raised that tragedy.
I have two follow-up questions. First off, the Auditor General indicates that there's $45 million that will be left unspent, unallocated at the same time as communities need those resources by the end of this fiscal year. What steps are you taking to make sure that that $45 million is put out? Secondly, one of the things that has been indicated by the Auditor General and Indigenous organizations as well is that there is no culturally appropriate or culturally specific training for officers in those communities. Now, we're talking about Indigenous communities that have often a profound distrust of policing, given our police role in dragging off Indigenous kids to residential schools in those horrific conditions. What are the steps that you are going to take to ensure that there is culturally appropriate, culturally specific training for those officers? And how do you ensure that $45 million is spent?
Mr. Chair, two very important questions from Mr. Julian. I have confidence the RCMP have understood and share exactly that concern around the appropriate cultural sensitivity training and understanding of that history that Mr. Julian referred to. My conversations with the Commissioner, and he can elaborate perhaps also at a different moment on the work they've done and the funding, the investments that we have made in partnership with the management of the RCMP to correct this very understandable concern that Mr. Julian raised. It is improving. There is still more work to do, and the leadership of the RCMP is committed to doing that work. With respect to the lapsed money, I was very surprised in my conversation with the Auditor General when I was briefed on her report. There is such a need to invest in this space, including with provinces and territories, as I said, but it doesn't absolve the Government of Canada of its responsibility to do the right thing. The idea that this money would lapse or not be allocated is understandably something that was surprising and concerning to me. Our Associate Deputy Minister has assured me that those circumstances won't repeat themselves in terms of arriving at agreements with provinces and territories. Again, it sounds like I'm sort of avoiding the question by talking about provinces and territories, but the constitutional requirement to deliver these services under provincial legislation means that simply allocating money that's outside of an agreement with a province and territory doesn't work. And some provinces are better at this than others. Some respond more quickly. Some have capacity challenges. Doesn't absolve us of the responsibility to do more and not see that funding lapse.
Thank you.
Totally share that view.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Mr. Julian. We're moving into the second round now. Mr. Caputo for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and I will address all of my questions directly to the witnesses through you. Thank you to all the witnesses. Thank you, Minister, for being here. Commissioner Kelly, can you please confirm that disgraced former Colonel Russell Williams is also at La Macasa, which houses Paul Bernardo and Luca Magnotta?
No, I cannot confirm. I cannot confirm that information.
Now, how about Guy Turcotte? Is he also there?
I can also not confirm that information.
Did you confirm that Luca Magnotta was there? Did the CSC eventually confirm that?
Well, that's in the public domain.
Okay.
right now.
And how about Paul Bernardo? Did the CSC eventually confirm that they were there?
That's also was in the public domain.
I'm not asking whether it was in the public domain. I'm asking whether the CSC confirmed it for those two offenders, but you're not prepared to confirm it for the other two. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay, so we have one set of rules and another set of rules. I'm clear there. Now, Minister, the regulations, as you know, we have the Corrections and Conditional Release Act, and the Corrections and Conditional Release Act talks about the regulations. We're clear, obviously, on that. Now, when it comes to the regulations, the government, the minister, you have control over those regulations, correct?
No, there's a process through Treasury Board and a regulatory process, but I recognize that it's in the hands of the cabinet, yes.
It is in the hands. So the final say over the regulations is with the government. We can be clear on that, correct?
Again, I'm not an expert on parliamentary procedure. I think there's a committee, a joint scrutiny of regulations committee. Our colleagues in the Senate are very interested in these issues. I think
Minister, let's not get in.
But if you want to have an esoteric discussion on the regulatory process, I'd be happy to have.
No, I'm not having an
Treasury Board
esoteric
take you
discussion.
through it.
I'm saying when it comes to the regulations, the buck stops with the government, correct?
Again, there's a parliamentary review process that I'm not familiar with. So I get the trap in the question. I'll say yes, and then you'll find an example. So I recognize that regulations are in the hands of the cabinet.
It's no trap. It's actually very clear. The reality is that the government creates the regulations. Then the CSC, Correctional Service of Canada, implements those regulations. Okay? Those regulations allowed for the transfer of Bernardo and Magnotta. Okay? So you have the ability to change those regulations, correct?
The government has a general authority as long as it's within the four corners of the statute to change regulations.
I'm not talking about the authority. In this case, Minister, the government could change the regulations and it hasn't, correct?
Our government has confidence that the regulations are appropriate in giving the correctional service, in their independent and professional judgment, the responsibility of assigning convicted federal offenders, in this case, people convicted of murder, to the appropriate, secure federal penitentiary.
So in this case, you are okay with the likes of Magnotta, Bernardo, and Williams being not only in medium security, but being together at La Casa, correct?
Well, again, for operational security reasons that the commissioner can elaborate, we don't discuss or actually do videos telling Canadians where particular inmates are serving their sentences. It's for the security of the men and women who work in those institutions. So that's an irresponsible course that I don't think we're going to start on. And I share the concern that Canadians have about...
Minister, we're not talking about my conduct. We're talking here about the government and whether you will create regulations. Because those regulations allowed the transfer of Bernardo, they allowed the transfer of Williams, and they allowed the transfer of Magnotta. And you're here telling us, no, CSC is going to do their job. Minister, you have the opportunity to change those regulations right here, right now. Will you commit to do this? Because you've said we don't intervene on specific cases. I'm not asking for you to intervene on a specific case, Minister. I'm asking for you to intervene on a class of offenders. Will you intervene on a class of offenders, an injustice that has happened, and change those regulations right here, right now?
Well, again, if you want to be technical, I actually can't change those regulations right here and right now. I explained to you there's a Treasury Board process with the governor and council. So no, I can't change those regulations right here and right now, Mr. Chair.
Will you commit to changing those regulations to address this class of offender, yes or no?
I will commit to ensure that those regulations, which focus as their most important objective on public safety, are appropriate to give the correctional service the authority to keep federally sentenced inmates in secure federal prisons to protect the public. That's a very important objective.
So it's appropriate that Paul Bernardo is in medium security, and you are fine with that. Minister, I will take it that you don't care that Paul Bernardo is in medium security. I will take it as that way because you're not prepared to act. Because if you're not prepared to act, then what are we even talking about this for? It's someone else's problem, but no, Minister, this lays directly at your feet. When was the last time you went to La Casa, Minister?
Thank you, Mr. Caputo. Your time's up, please. Mr. Biddle, you're up, please, for 5.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm from Niagara region, and I just watched Mr. Caputo, and I don't doubt that his sincerity is there and his concern is there. My constituents went through this. The victims' families are still here, and it's very painful for them. It's painful for my community. But if you can explain the law, perhaps, for those who are watching. I know Mr. Caputo is a former prosecutor, and I don't expect the provincial attorney general ever called him to tell him how to prosecute a case. Mr. Motz is a former police officer. I don't imagine the mayor called him to tell him who to arrest and how to conduct an investigation. Can you please explain your role with respect to federal correctional inmates and what the law says on this subject?
Mr. Chair, through you to Mr. Biddle, thank you for the question. And we obviously share the concern that you articulated for the communities you represent, and particularly the victims of some of these most notorious crimes. It is every Canadian remembers some of these horrific crimes and remembers, sadly, the names of the perpetrators. You identified, I think, an important distinction in terms of the role of an elected minister, an elected government, and the proper administration of justice, including the correctional service, which, when we think of the administration of justice, we think of courts or the police, for example. But I think you properly drew a parallel to administering a correctional service of Canada that is responsible for, in some cases, and the Commissioner in the subsequent part of the morning can provide more details, 13,500 people are currently residing approximately in different federal correctional facilities across the country, and there are a number of thousands of others that are under supervision in the community. I think, Mr. Biddle, you correctly identified the challenge here. Some people, in my view irresponsibly, seek to say that because a particular offender was transferred based on a series of long-standing criteria administered properly by independent professional public servants accountable to the Commissioner of the Correctional Service for those decisions. These are not new rules. These have existed for a long time, and they're made often in the interest of institutional security. That's something we perhaps don't reflect on, the safety for the brave women and men who work in the Correctional Service. And I visited a number of these facilities and been very impressed by the women and men who work in these difficult environments in these correctional facilities. Their safety and security is often a factor when the Correctional Service makes these decisions in terms of transfers. It's not new that people would transfer from a maximum to a minimum, to a medium security institution. Rather, as I said, in 2013-14 alone, 319 inmates were transferred in the last year of Mr. Harper's government from maximum security to medium security. That's certainly higher than in any recent year. So these are normal decisions, but what's disingenuous is to pretend that because somebody is in a medium security facility, there isn't a very high level of security in terms of making it impossible to escape from these facilities, that their behavior isn't appropriately controlled within these institutions, or to pretend somehow that they're on their way out to the community. That's the really disingenuous part, is to pretend that some of these notorious people who are serving life sentences in secure federal prisons are somehow on their way out to the community. That's the part that we think is very disingenuous and not conducive to public confidence in a correctional service system in which I have a lot of confidence.
I'd like to respond also to Mr. Shipley's comment comments, and I think it shows how unserious the Conservatives are on climate change, that their only environmental policy is recycling slogans. But I was wondering if you could comment, Minister, with respect to what climate change is doing for the security landscape that you have to deal with, that our public servants have to deal with, and to protect Canadians.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. As I said, for example, just thinking anecdotally from as a member of Parliament in New Brunswick during some of these extreme weather events, I'm thinking of hurricanes, I'm thinking of flooding circumstances. In our province, the RCMP in many cases are the police of jurisdiction. They're the contract police to the province of New Brunswick. So I have seen remarkable work done by women and men in the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and the Coast Guard, for which I used to have responsibility. I no longer do. These public safety personnel are at the front lines of protecting Canadians during these alarming, worrisome, and potentially very dangerous events. The RCMP, if I think of hurricanes that hit Atlantic Canada, my province in New Brunswick, our chair's province at Prince Edward Island was obviously very badly impacted by some of these events. It was the women and men who serve in the RCMP who were providing that public safety presence in these very difficult moments. So working constructively and effectively on climate change should be a priority for everyone.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Biddle. Ms. Michaud, please, for 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Minister, the government is not doing so well in the polls recently, and people are making misses, and we can think of MP Mensens, who's also Deputy Speaker of the House, and there is an RCMP investigation underway on Chinese police stations in Montreal. I won't name names. I won't ask you to comment, but there are experts, former investigators at Sûreté du Québec, and even a member of the RCMP and former diplomats who have said this makes no sense. There is a separation of powers, and that's at the base of things. So how come your MPs are interfering in the work of the RCMP? Mr. Chair, I understand how Ms. Michaud has described these circumstances, understand these investigations underway. The commissioner is in a better position to comment. I also recognize that Ms. Michaud is correct. It is not ideal to have government MPs or opposition MPs to make comments about investigations that are underway. And it's not something I'm going to do. I have full confidence in the RCMP to look into the circumstances, and I understand also the Canadian Chinese diaspora is often targeted by this behavior, entirely inappropriate conduct by Chinese government in this instance, and Mr. Vigneault and Mr. Duhem can talk about the way they counter and limit those threats, but I'm entirely in agreement with you that to talk about an individual or an investigation in particular is not useful. And moreover, I don't think it helps the RCMP do the important work that it does. Well, thank you very much, and I count on you to send the right messages to your Liberal colleagues. Now, there was a talk about tabling a bill on electoral reform. Congratulations. Now, this to impede these practices of foreign interference in our democratic processes. I wonder why you didn't take advantage of this to reform the elections. We made promises in 2015, and we have not seen anything done. When you talk about 2015, we had the elections in 2019 and 2021 subsequently. Wasn't a huge success in terms of government commitment. We noted that in the 2015 to 2019 Parliament, it was very difficult to arrive at a consensus. So if we agreed with the MB on Mr. Singh to make access to polling easier, and I appreciate your question and the smile on your face when you asked the question. I don't think it would have been very useful if we'd had a little window to introduce a bill to reinforce the electoral process to add this aspect.
For 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Two more questions. First, on the CBSA cuts now. We have a dearth of funding around CBSA officers. We've heard testimony before this committee that we lack about 3,000 CBSA officers across the country. Now, this government can rightfully blame the Harper regime for having cut back on CBSA, and of course, the Harper regime was horrible for public safety. But the reality is you've been in government now for 9 years and you have not addressed that shortage of CBSA officers. How do you intend to respond to those needs given the rise in auto theft? Second question. In terms, you said in your presentation, s'attaquer à la haine. We know that every single ideologically motivated mass murder in North America in 2022 and 2023 came from the extreme right. This is a growing and persistent threat to our democracy and to public safety. What are the actions your government intends to put into place to counter that threat from the extreme right and extreme right violence?
Mr. Chair, through you, Mr. Julian, you asked two important questions. We recognize the good work done by the Border Services Agency and the frontline personnel. We also recognize that continued and sustained investments are important. We announced an amount of funding targeted specifically at some auto theft concerns, but recognize that we can do more. Perhaps the CBSA, I know I'm going to run out of time and I want to get to your second question, but I think I would have happily yielded some time to the CBSA to answer the details of those particular recruitment challenges. But in order to get to the second part of the question, perhaps in the second part of this meeting, the CBSA could answer that directly. We do share, Mr. Chair, excuse me, we do share absolutely the concern raised by Mr. Julian with respect to the rise in hate crimes, the increasingly violent rhetoric that sadly motivates people, incites people to undertake some of the most heinous and violent actions that we've seen in recent years. My conversations with David Vigneault and his colleagues at CSIS leave me with a very real concern about ideologically motivated violent extremists. Mr. Julian referred to that. There's also religiously motivated violent extremism. We have invested with the RCMP and their partners in terms of helping police forces across the country, police of jurisdiction, including the RCMP in many cases, better understand ways to prosecute some of these hate crimes. It's a difficult space for prosecutors and police officers to investigate. Doesn't mean that we don't need, as a national police organization, in the case of the RCMP, to take responsibility to working with partners. But I know that if there's time in the second part, and I don't want to pass it to the officials who will be here because they can provide, I think, very good answers. And I know that David Vigneault would be very anxious to answer Mr. Julian's question with some important work that CSIS is doing.
Thank you, Mr. LeBlanc. Thank you, Mr. Julian. We'll move to Mr. Lloyd, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here. We have the whole national security establishment of the country, so hopefully we can get some good answers to my questions. Minister, there was a pretty groundbreaking decision earlier this month of the Supreme Court, the Buyovitz decision. I wonder if you can tell us about what the impact of that decision has been in the last month.
So again, I'm not familiar with the precise details of that decision. Happy to answer Mr. Lloyd's question, but the Associate Deputy Minister would be the best one to give you the precise answer to your question.
Thank you. And, going into the decision, the Buyovitz decision is in regards to Internet Protocol addresses, IP addresses. And these IP addresses are essential tools, essential evidence for our law enforcement to track down and prosecute child predators. Under the Supreme Court decision, it has now been ruled that there's a judicial authorization required in order to get those IP addresses. It's the equivalent of saying you need a search warrant to look in the phone book. This decision has had an immediate effect on basically freezing and, in the words of some RCMP officers, terminating child predator investigations in Canada. And some believe that Canada has now become the safest place in the world to be a child predator. I wonder if you can give your comments on that, Minister.
Well, that obviously would not be a circumstance that's at all acceptable. I am informed that the RCMP and CSIS are obviously looking at the court decision and determining, based on some legal advice, the operational impacts of that decision. Getting access to an IP address, I wouldn't have compared to looking in a phone book. I think that's a little bit disingenuous. These are areas that are governed by law and a body of case law. But we recognize that the police, the RCMP and other police partners and CSIS in the case of national security investigations, need appropriate access to that information, and will take whatever steps are necessary to ensure that the police have access to that information, while obviously respecting the Charter of Rights and cases that
thank you,
the courts
Minister,
will
for
decide.
that. And I'm not that reassured because we do have RCMP officers who are speaking out already on this. They spoke out earlier this month, and they said Canada must act quickly. This ruling opens a huge gap in our ability to protect kids and stop offenders from preying on them. There must always be a balance between citizen privacy and the state. But in the words of this RCMP officer, who is on Twitter, Sergeant Carrie Shima, this decision has put our children in the crosshairs. Those are the words of RCMP officers on the front lines. It's now been 3 weeks. Your government has now unveiled massive new legislation, the Online Harms Act, and yet I can find nothing in your Online Harms Act that deals with the fallout from this very concerning decision, which, in the words of an RCMP officer, has essentially terminated investigations into online sex offenders and identifying child victims. We cannot allow our country to be a safe haven for child predators. What are we going to do about this immediately, Minister?
So, Mr. Chair, I share, obviously, Mr. Lloyd's view that we can't allow Canada to become a safe haven for child predators. That's a circumstance that would be obviously completely inappropriate. I have confidence that the RCMP, respecting the law, respecting decisions of the Supreme Court and the Charter, will come to the government with advice, as will CSIS, on the most appropriate way to ensure that they have the tools to do that exact work that Mr. Lloyd correctly identified. And perhaps the Commissioner or others can discuss this in the second part. But, Mr. Chair, I think the important principle is that in a case where an important Supreme Court decision reviews authorities
Sorry,
like
Minister,
that.
I do only have about a minute left. I just want to say, how far are you willing to go to protect the children in this country? Would you be willing to consider using the notwithstanding clause if that were the only option to allow prosecutors or allow RCMP to do these investigations?
We're obviously not going to answer hypothetical questions like that. Our views in terms of the notwithstanding clause are well known. I think Mr. Lloyd is well ahead of himself in concluding that the advice that I'm going to get as minister with my colleague, the
I'm
minister.
not making any conclusions, Minister.
Mr. Lloyd, you asked me a question.
How far you're willing to go to protect children in this country? Is that
do
how far you're
everything
willing
that
to
we
go?
lawfully can to protect children and support the women and men in the RCMP and CSIS and other agencies that do this important work. They are doing effective and good work in this area,
They can't
and the
because of
government's
this
job
decision.
is to ensure
They
they
can no
have the
longer do that work
resources and the
because of this
authorities to
decision.
do that work.
Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to Mr. Gahir, please, online. 5 minutes.
Great, thank you. And thank you to the Minister and the witnesses for appearing before the committee. Minister, if you look at Mississauga and the 11 electoral wards of Mississauga, Ward 5, it contains Pearson Airport, and it's largely within my riding of Mississauga-Malton. It by far saw the most number of auto thefts in 2023 out of all of Mississauga, and understandably because it's home to Pearson Airport, which is a transport hub. It's been about a month and a half since we've had the National Summit on combating auto theft. I want to ask what progress has been made since then.
So, Mr. Chair, through you to Mr. Gahir, thank you for the question. And you correctly noted in your community, the community you represent, and the neighboring communities, this is understandably a very real source of concern to the citizens, to our partners in municipal governments, in the provincial government. As colleagues will know, we made some initial investments both in police partners with police partners and the Border Services Agency. We'll continue to do more. I have taken note of comments and conversations that we've had with elected municipal leaders in this space. I know that the Mayor of Brampton has been an effective partner and has identified some concerns around the ability to quickly procure the appropriate scanning technologies for some of these intermodal hubs. So we're very much seized with that work, and we'll do everything we can as quickly as we can to support the important work done by police services. In some cases, these are municipal or regional police forces. The RCMP, as the Commissioner noted a little while ago, has an important role in coordinating much of the transnational organized crime elements involved in this increase in auto theft, and their ability to work with international partners in terms of cutting off some of the money that organized crime would benefit from some of this traffic in stolen vehicles. So I always take advice from the Commissioner of the RCMP and the Border Services Agency in terms of what the government can give them in terms of additional resources or tools or authorities to work with their partners in this space. I talked regularly with colleagues in provincial governments and some provincial premiers in my role as Intergovernmental Affairs Minister around what we can do in this area. I am very encouraged by some of what my colleagues at Transport Canada are talking about in terms of vehicle standards. I had a conversation in this area with the U.S. Homeland Security Secretary when I was in Washington some weeks ago around the integrated nature of the vehicle manufacturing sector in Canada and how we might work with American partners to ensure that some of the latest technologies could be included also that would discourage criminals from attempting to steal vehicles or make it harder. So we're always looking for good ideas, and we'll continue to do more and more to make sure that Canadians feel secure in this increasingly worrisome context.
Great. Thank you. So I'm glad you touched on that point, actually, because Mayor Patrick Brown of Brampton has gone on record on CP24 to state that there is a leaky bucket, and he claims that the leaky bucket is the Port of Montreal. And he highlighted some issues with scanners and the timeline of procuring those scanners. Could you just comment on perhaps some of the resources that we've provided to different law enforcement agencies, including the CBSA, to help target this problem?
Mr. Chair, thank you to Mr. Gahir and his colleagues also from communities near the one he represents who have spoken to me. I had a conversation with our colleague, Mr. Sidhu, about this again yesterday as well. Mayor Brown has been an effective advocate for his community and for his regional police services in this area. It has been, I know, for the RCMP, a privilege to work with the Peel Regional Police, with the Toronto Police Service. In some successful interdiction operations, the Border Services Agency plays a key role here. One of the challenges, people understandably focus on the Port of Montreal or other places where these vehicles, stolen vehicles, might be exported. I am told that 30 to 40% of the vehicles that are stolen are in fact resold in Canada. So it's not a perfect solution to choke off the export points only. We need to work also with police of jurisdiction, local police, to hopefully prevent these vehicles from being stolen or arrest the persons that are stealing these vehicles at the point of arresting them. It's the most inefficient and expensive way to deal with the problem at the very top of the criminal activity when they're being exported. We're going to obviously give the CBSA the authority and the instruments they need to do the work that we expect of them, but we also need to do it in a sort of concerted and coordinated way with local police. That's the most effective way to bring these numbers down. That's what Canadians want, and their concern about the increasingly violent nature of these offenses, as I mentioned, is something that we share and will want to attack in collaboration with partners as well.
Thank you, Mr. Gahir. And that brings the first part of our committee meeting today to an end. I want to thank you, Minister, for appearing and your testimony. We're going to take a 5-minute suspension. Thank you. We're into a third round. And Mr. Lloyd, we'll go right into questions. You're up first for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And, kind of leading off on my last line of questioning with the minister in the last round, he said that in regards to the Biovitz decision requiring judicial authorizations for IP addresses, that it was an unfair allegory for me to make, that it was kind of like asking for a search warrant to look in the phone book. In fact, it's actually worse than that. Because imagine a phone book where there was phone numbers listed, but there were no names listed. The only names that are being listed are the ISPs, the telecom companies that service those phone numbers, the Teluses, the Rogers, the Bells. So police are being told now that they can't even look into that phone book of those IP addresses. They can't even know who the service providers are unless they have a warrant. And the effect of this, according to frontline RCMP officers who are working in the integrated child exploitation units across this country in the past month since this decision has come in, is that telecommunications companies, in compliance with the Supreme Court of Canada decision, are now denying this critical information that police are using to track down and prosecute child sex offenders, child predators. Commissioner Duhem, can you provide us with some more context on the impact that this decision has had on the RCMP integrated child exploitation units in the last month?
So thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. And we were a little bit surprised with the decision that came by. And at this point in time, a decision was rendered 3 weeks ago. I've asked throughout the country to monitor any impacts on our operations. And I don't have the numbers just yet because it's relatively fresh. We'd be more than happy to come back to the committee. I think it's important to note that although we're focused on children, which is extremely important, I'm looking at it much broader. I'm looking at threats to elected officials, threats to individuals and whatnot. So it's a little early. We've been through other cases like Stitchcomb. When Stitchcomb came in, we had to readjust. Our concern is just we want to make sure that there's no additional delays, and we're monitoring that right now. But I don't have the total impact right now as to the impacts on the operation.
Thank you. And a very good point that you've made is that, of course, the issue of protecting children is of paramount importance. But this decision is not just impacting child predator investigations. This is about threats against elected officials. In the case of Biovitz itself is about a case of fraud involving stolen credit cards. This is a groundbreaking decision. And I must say it was not a clear majority, like it was a majority of the Supreme Court, but it was a 5-4 decision. And the dissenting judges, in their own words, said that this decision would, in their words, quote, seriously thwart the police's ability to investigate such serious offenses against children. They also said later down that it would exacerbate the existing challenges faced by the criminal justice system. Commissioner Duhem, we know that our police are overwhelmed with the tasks that we have given them. They're overwhelmed by the paperwork requirements that are required for them. Can you tell us what the impact is of having to get search warrants every time they get an IP address, say, from the FBI? Because we know that it's our international allies who are providing us with this information. There was a case in my own area, in the greater Edmonton area, where a mother was allegedly putting up videos of their own child. And it was because of a conviction and investigation in California that led to the procurement of those IP addresses, which were given to our integrated child exploitation units, which allowed them to rescue that child from that situation. And under this decision, those IP addresses would arguably be inadmissible in a case. This is a devastating blow for child protection in our country. Can you tell us what these paperwork requirements, these new administrative requirements, are going to do to investigations? Thank you.
So, Mr. Chair, the impact is not only felt in the RCMP, but it's also felt by my colleague, Mr. David Vigneault from CSIS. But again, the decision was rendered in 3 weeks. I don't have the number of files that took place in the last 3 weeks that incurred delays, but from an organization's perspective, we are monitoring as to what is the impact on our current operations. I think I kind of know what the impacts are, but I want some metrics to make sure that we can come forward with a proposal to the minister as we move forward.
Thank you. And with that, Mr. Chair, I just want to quickly move my motion that I gave notice of motion at the last committee meeting, which all members of this committee do have, regarding the police resources that are being directed to food banks across the country that are dealing with the impact of, in some cases in Surrey, BC, recently we had so I am moving this motion. The motion has been moved. And, in Surrey, police were brought in to redirect traffic because of the huge amount of Canadians that were seeking food. We have food banks in Montreal where police have been directed off the very important work that they're doing on our streets to protect Canadians to provide crowd control at these food banks. The cost of food is going up in Canada, and we know that on April 1st, there will be a 23% increase in the carbon tax in this country. And that's not just in the provinces where the federal backstop is in place. Every province, even with their own carbon tax regime, has to increase this price to meet the federal requirements. And at a time like this, when inflation is roaring, when food prices are escalating, in some cases over 10%, in some categories, Canadians can no longer afford food, and we can no longer afford to see our police officers that are overstretched across jurisdictions, not just the RCMP, having to go to food banks to provide crowd control to protect Canadians and protect food banks because of these rising costs of food. And so with that, I'll move my motion, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Ms. O'Connell, please.
Thank you, Chair. I move to adjourn debate.
So moved.
And I'll ask for a recorded vote.
Recorded vote.
Ms. O'Connell,
Yes.
Mr. Biddle,
Yes.
Mr. McKinnon,
Yes.
Mr. Gay,
Yes.
Monsieur Lightbound,
Oui.
Mr. Shipley,
No.
Mr. Lloyd,
No.
Mr. Mutz,
No.
Mr. Currick,
No.
Madame Michaud,
Oui.
Monsieur Julien.
Oui.
Yeas pour 7, nays contre 4.
Okay.
4.
All right, so we're going to continue, and it's Ms. O'Connell up for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to our witnesses for being here today. I want to start, Commissioner Duhaime, in terms of sexual harassment and sexual assault within the service and the RCMP, can you please update us on what you're doing in your leadership to ensure that the workforce within the RCMP are protected, in particular with women, and that when there are instances or cases where there is sufficient evidence of actual an assault or violence, that these cases are also being referred to local police for charges and not simply a member loses their job and doesn't face consequences that a civilian would, for example.
So, Mr. Chair, let me give you a few numbers on the sexual harassment side of things over the last couple of years. In 2021, there's 48 out of 373 harassment files. And out of those, 12 did not meet the definition of harassment and violence. 16 at least had one allegation that met the definition of harassment. 18 were withdrawn by the principal parties. And I must stress that our harassment process is independent, which is not, it's independent from the RCMP. The investigator is independent. The decision maker is a member of the RCMP who's presented the investigation. And out of the total file, there's one that's still undergoing investigation. I want to make it perfectly clear. One complaint is too much. One complaint, the damage in that unit's already been done. We want to get to a point where we don't get any more complaints. And the stats for 2022 are very similar. But the point is that I expect that every employee engaged in the organization respects and adheres to the core values of our organization. And we have measures in place to address with regular members. We have a code of conduct, which there's been some really, really great work that's been done over the last couple of years, where we're revamping the whole code of conduct to bring it back, to bring it to what is expected from Canadians when we are dealing with the code of conduct. So we're being more aggressive on everything to do with sexual harassment and sexual assaults in the organization.
Thank you. Director Vignon, similar question to you with your organization and the members serving. There was recent media reports too that there are challenges in terms of reporting given the nature of some of the work that CSIS members might do in terms of protection of identity, which all makes sense. But how are you ensuring that within the service that you're protecting employees and ensuring that the nature of their work doesn't prevent or create some sort of loophole in terms of reporting and the protection of members of the service, in particular women in this case, to be able to report, and obviously then the additional work to make sure it's a safe workplace for everyone?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. And I welcome this question by the member. This is a very serious issue. I have to say that I don't want this to become a bumper sticker because everybody says it, but when we say that it is inappropriate and, it will not be tolerated, I can tell you that it's exactly the case at CSIS. I have made personal commitment to create an ombudsperson to allow for people, even though we have very robust processes inside, and it's been recognized recently by the Federal Court of Appeal that our processes internally to investigate are adequate to address these issues. But it's more important to go over and above that. So we'll have a separate person, an ombudsperson, to look into this. I've also committed to report publicly an annual report on any cases of wrongdoing, which will, of course, will include any case of sexual violence. And I want to take this opportunity to say that anybody who has been affected by sexual violence, personally, my heart goes out to them. And I have made a commitment to all of my employees when I talked to them recently, that, if there's any issues that, affects them, please bring this to me personally. And I also made it very, very clear, and I think it's important because the case you referred to, Ms. O'Connell, the media reporting, unfortunately, had very serious inaccuracies in them, and I corrected the record, within 24 hours publicly, that there is absolutely nothing that prevents an employee who has been victim of a crime to engage with the police. And I've made that very clear publicly and to all of my employees. So hopefully that will clear up the ambiguity. But I welcome the question and continue. We need to continue, CSIS and any organization in our country, to continue to do best for the people who are victims of sexual violence. Merci.
Thank you. I think it's important that we have that discussion here today. So thank you for both coming and sharing that. I want to move just quickly. I know I have limited time. Commissioner Kelly, you've said before at this committee in regards to reclassification of inmates and prisoners that the previous conservative language around most appropriate, or I believe your officials have said this in the media as well, that language would still, the threshold and the evaluation that your team collectively does to make these decisions would still have happened under the previous conservative language, because most appropriate is building into also those other factors. And maybe you could list some of the factors that actually go into making transfer reclassification decisions.
Thank you, Ms. O'Connell. Your time's up. Perhaps one of your teammates can follow up with Ms. Kelly, or she can answer it again. Ms. Michaud, please, for 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Thank you, Chair. I have a question for the Minister of Public Safety. In the Minister's mandate letter, the safety of our communities and resilience of forests for forest fires by investing in equipment and the firefighting infrastructure. I met recently with a union representing forestry firefighters in Canada, and I was told that these firefighters are not recognized in the same way as regular firefighters. They don't have the same benefits, the same type of equipment either. I'm wondering if you know why the forestry firefighters don't have the same status as regular firefighters. And I'm told it's not necessarily a change in legislation or regulation that we need, but maybe we need to change the national classification of occupations. Could you tell us more about this, please? Thank you, Chair, for the question.
would want to comment on what an extremely difficult last season it was for forest fires in this country, and we're anticipating another season ahead of us that's going to be quite stressful for the country. Ensuring that our forest fires who work with us in this care have the best possible supports is really important to us, being as well prepared this year or better prepared this year than we were last year. Natural Resources Canada has ownership of some of those aspects of how we support firefighters in this country. So, Madame Michaud, I'm very happy to commit to following up with you in terms of how we can address that very specific question. Merci beaucoup.
Génial, merci. Peut-être.
Excellent, thank you. Now, very quickly to CBSA. The minister announced $28 million regarding automobile theft. 59 million would go to capacity building for information 5.9 to support the officers doing inspections of containers, 4 million for new technology, 3.5 million to allow the improved capacity on examining containers, especially in the Toronto metropolitan area. Has all this money gone into the CBSA account? How does this work? Are you already able to put in place new policies to help officers do their jobs? And there's a lot of talk about the Montreal port and its containers, but also trains and, goods coming in the country, exiting. Does the CBS's mandate need to change so we can examine what's leaving the country? Already, as we speak, we have increased funding, especially in regard to the Port of Montreal. Cars that are seized, this is evidence that allows the policing agencies to move forward their criminal investigations. We're working closely with Sûreté du Québec and the Montreal City Police and to ensure that protocols are clear. So the numbers, the capacity to open up containers and seize vehicles has increased, and we are working with partners, police forces everywhere, because one of the concern was the huge volume of stolen cars. So we're working on preventing theft, and of course the railways and railway stations are targets. We are trying to share all the data we have as to importers, carriers, to help police forces dismantle the networks for car theft. And I can confirm that the agency remains very committed to act, especially in regard to assisting police forces across the country. If they have any tips on car theft, it's to stop and investigate. Thank you.
We're moving on to Mr. Julian, please.
Mr. President, I'd like to go to you, Ms. Kelly and Ms. Uedes. We've been talking at Public Safety about the horrific crimes of some of these offenders who've been transferred to medium security, Bernardo, McNaughton, Williams. I have two questions. First off, is there a higher risk of escape at a medium security prison than at a maximum security prison? And secondly, for Ms. Uedes, is there a greater possibility that inmates who are in medium security would be granted parole at the end of their sentence? The crimes that these individuals committed are horrific. It is very clear that Canadians want to be protected from these predators for the remainder of their lives. So I think these are two key questions that I'd love to have responses on.
Okay, thank you for the question. So on the first one, in terms of escapes, the perimeter security at a maximum and medium security is the same. So we have fences, we have walls, we have patrols, and it's also armed correctional officers.
But my question specifically is, if you look at the statistics, is there a greater likelihood of escape from a medium security prison than a maximum security prison?
I would say no. Most of our escapes are from minimum security. That's
Is
where
it
they
possible you
occur.
could share those figures with the committee to indicate the rate of escapes at maximum security and medium security prisons?
Yes, I could do that. And on your second question, in terms of,
That's for me.
that's for you. Sorry.
Thank you for the question. I think it's logical in terms of just reasoning that someone who is in a maximum security institution is much less likely to be released by the parole board than one who is in a minimum institution. But no matter where they are, there's two criteria.
Again,
Okay.
is it possible for you to share those figures with us? The parole applications and approvals at maximum security, medium security?
Likely, yes, we do have that, so we'll get that to you.
Thank you. And you were going to say two criteria? The chair hasn't cut me off yet, so.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes,
Yeah.
yes, there are two criteria in law. So the first is that the offender, will not, by reoffending, present an undue risk to society before the expiration of their sentence. So that's the first criteria. And it's not an or, it's an and, that the release of the offender will contribute to the protection of society by facilitating his or her reintegration as a law-abiding citizen. Those are the two criteria that the board is most interested in and by law must consider before making a decision.
Ms. Odes, we're moving on to Mr. Couric, please, for 5 minutes.
Thanks very much, and thanks to our witnesses for being here, and specifically a big thanks to all of those who serve under you and your organizations for the hard work that they do to keep Canadians safe. Commissioner Duhamel, I'm just wondering if you could commit to table the number of cases that might be affected by the Bajkovic decision. Is that something you'd be able to take back and table to this committee?
Mr. President, I can commit we'll look into it, but I'm just not quite sure if we have it. So.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Commissioner Kelly, are narcotics and hard drugs allowed in Canadian prisons?
No, they are not.
So then why, and do you not think it's a little bit disingenuous that there are prison needle exchanges and safe injection sites that allow for the legal consumption of narcotics in Canadian prisons?
So these are harm reduction programs that have been implemented. In terms of the prison needle exchange program,
So Commissioner Kelly, you stated that narcotics are not allowed in our prisons. Yet there is programs that facilitate their legal use in our prisons. I think Canadians are rightfully disappointed, and quite frankly, I hear from many that are disgusted that that would be something and the official policy of the Correctional Service of Canada. But I think further to that, Commissioner, do the guards that are responsible for ensuring that inmates are safe and ensuring that the Canadian public are safe, do guards, the correctional service officers of this country, support those programs and their use in our prisons?
So in terms of the prison needle...
So do guards, do officers support these programs? And they're the ones that are on the front lines of facing the consequences of these programs. Do they support those programs in our prisons?
I would say that some, yes, do support it. I would say that the prison needle exchange program is more challenging, and there's more support for the overdose prevention service.
So it's interesting because when it comes to, and I've tabled a petition in the House of Commons from correctional officers, and I've spoken to many correctional officers, and I'm proud to represent Battle River Crowfoot, of which is home to a federal institution, and many of my constituents are, in fact, correctional officers. And so far, I have yet to find an officer that supports the administration and allowance of illegal narcotics in Canadian prisons. Madam Commissioner, when it comes to stopping the flow of narcotics, do you think an environmental assessment of netting over a prison or some of the other tools that could actually deal with things like drones but getting held up in the bureaucracy, do you think that's an acceptable excuse to slow down the approval of things that would actually stop the flow of illegal drugs into our prisons?
Actually, we've done an awful lot. Drones are definitely an issue.
A huge issue, yes.
Yes, and there's been an increase in the last year of 37%. Since 2020, it's been an increase of 104%.
Yeah.
And we have different measures that we use, intelligence, searches, but also we have drone detection systems.
But I do
Chair,
hear
point of
again
order.
from...
Chair. I understand Mr. Kirk loves the sound of his own voice, but I would actually love to hear the answer from Commissioner Kelly on any of his questions.
Okay, let's continue, Mr. Carrick, please.
Thank you, and I'm sorry that Ms. O'Connell is so offended by some of the questions that I'm asking on behalf of prison guards in our country. So Commissioner Kelly, the challenge associated with some of these things is that there is there's been a staggering decline in morale within the correctional service. There has been a host of concerns. There's not trust within the Ombudsman's office. So my question is simple, and I hope to get a quick one to the parole board here as well. But will you commit to speaking with your officers on the ground to actually hear the concerns that they have within the service?
What I can say is in the last few days, I've visited 3 institutions, and every time I visit an institution, I speak to the union's representatives, and I gather their comments.
So some unsolicited advice is speak to some of the guards on the ground, Commissioner Kelly, because I can tell you the conversations that I have, there is a troubling lack of confidence and a growing decline in morale within your service that is ultimately impacting the public safety of not only those officers, but also the trust that Canadians need to have in their institutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carrick. We're moving on now to Mr. Gahir online, please.
Thank you, Chair. So my questions are largely for the RCMP, but others should feel free to chime in as well. Commissioner, we've seen a rise in extortion attempts that have been targeting the South Asian community across Canada. But there's been obviously a large focus of that in BC and in Ontario. It always follows a very similar pattern where business owners are reached out to, perhaps a phone call is made on WhatsApp, a certain amount is demanded. If the demand is not met, then their businesses or their homes are targeted, and oftentimes with gunfire. And I've received videos from constituents of their homes actually being targeted by gunfire. Do you want to comment on what perhaps the RCMP is doing to help this problem?
So thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. First off, I feel sorry for the people who have to go through this type of extortion. It's unacceptable in Canada. You will note that Peel had started a extortion crime task force, as well as one in Edmonton, and there's one in British Columbia. And what the RCMP is doing is the overarching role of connecting all 3 organizations to make sure that we have the right picture. There's some good intelligence being drawn from working together, and if we come across enough information where we have the appropriate information or evidence to lay charges, we will lay charges.
So the RCMP has gone on record to state that organized crime is obviously linked to this as well. But what I want to ask is, this was not happening prior to fall of last year. So was there, very frankly, is there an international component to this that was triggered by something that perhaps happened in the fall?
Well, I'm not quite sure if the numbers were the same, and apologize if I don't have the statistics. But I'm not quite sure if it's been influenced from a certain event, or you still had extortion, but maybe not at the level that you're seeing today with the violence that you're seeing today. So.
Yep. Look, I think certain members of the community are leveling allegations, saying that when the Prime Minister came out and spoke on the murder of Hardeep Singh Nijjar out in BC, perhaps that was a precipitating event. After that is when we saw a real spike in some of these extortion attempts, especially targeting the Punjabi Sikh community in Ontario, in BC, in Alberta, and elsewhere. We've also heard from Peel Police that perhaps this is inspiring copycats as well. That individuals have sort of, found this scheme in which they can make money, and they're not perhaps being caught by local law enforcement. Do you want to comment on that?
Well, I would first say that as to Peel's comments, I can't really comment on it. It's the first time I hear about copycats, but the RCMP takes the question of extortion very seriously, and that's why we put a national project team together to make sure that we can connect the dots and demonstrate that they're possibly related from what we're seeing in Ontario and Alberta and British Columbia. And I just want to share that the RCMP works really closely with the service to address any threats that come in and work with local police jurisdiction to make sure that we can keep the community safe.
Yeah. Does the CBSA want to comment on members of the community saying that this is linked to the comments that Prime Minister Trudeau made on Hardeep's signature?
I think this CBSA, in fact, we've had one employee kind of targeted by social media campaigns and that kind of information. And, I think we've worked very hard to make sure that people can trust the integrity of the CBSA officers and the people that are serving Canadians. So I think we have noticed some threats and comments directed towards one member of our team. And I think we've taken all appropriate action to make sure that the travelers are safe and that employee is safe.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Gahir, thank you. Mr. Motz, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. My questions today are going to be focused more to Ms. Geddes, specific to firearms. Now, I know that back in 2019, the Minister of the Day and internal documents have shown that the government has estimated the confiscation of the firearms will be 400 to 600 million. We know that is probably 3 times less than what it actually will be. Conservative estimates, and small c conservative estimates from across the industry put it at over $2 billion. So a couple questions around the confiscation. Government calls it buyback. You can't buy something back you never owned in the first place. But in any event, the confiscation of firearms, what is the department's plan to make that happen? First question. And how do you propose it to be rolled out? Who's going to be doing it? There's a lot of ambiguity in the industry and with firearm owners, and I think with public safety, because we're not sure exactly what's happening on that front. Could you just kind of give us an update on that, if you'd be so kind, please?
Thank you very much for the question. First of all, at Public Safety, we certainly are framing it as a firearm compensation program. As you pointed out, an extremely complex program to be able to deliver. Some of the data has indeed been difficult to obtain. We're working as closely as we can with business and industry who have access to the best possible data. We're working with chief firearms officers across the country as well to try to do our best to be able to get a good estimate of the number of firearms that we will be looking at compensation. In terms of the program development itself, as the minister spoke to, we're looking at doing this in 2 phases. So first, to be able to look at how we collect from business and industry, and in the process of doing so, to be able to learn from that about the most cost-effective, the most efficient, and the way in which to ensure the safety of Canadians in the way in which we deliver on this program. So first phase being business and industry, and the second phase being to reach out to individuals who are currently protected under the amnesty order. So we're doing it in a very careful, conscientious way. As I said, kind of got it by those 3 principles about efficiency for dollars for Canadians, doing this in a very cost-effective way, but also, as I said, making sure that we are prioritizing public safety throughout the execution of the program.
Okay, I'm going to get to the amnesty issue in a minute. What I find troubling is that the evidence that law enforcement has shown across the country is that this, you're the wrong person to ask, but I'm going to make the statement anyway, Ms. Geddes, that the confiscation of these firearms will do nothing to improve public safety in this country. Absolutely nothing. In fact, gun crimes continue to go up even during this amnesty program, and not by firearms owners. So I guess what I'm concerned about is the law enforcement community has pushed back on government and has voiced their concern and their opposition to being the ones responsible to confiscate these firearms, including the RCMP. I'm just wondering, you can go to industry and ask them to voluntarily surrender the firearms that fall under this prohibition, voluntarily with compensation, which I hope will be appropriate, except the taxpayers are going to be on the hook for it. But how are you going to deal with individuals? Who's going to collect the firearms from individuals who resist this policy, not because they are criminals, but we've made administrative criminals out of people without committing a criminal act. And I'm just kind of concerned about that. And I want to get to another question that it's in line with it, so together. So the government has introduced legislation to, some proposed legislation and changes to the Elections Act. One of them being the election might take place later in October, like October the 27th of 2025. So has there been any thought to the impact changes to the Elections Act will have on the amnesty period, which goes till October 25 of 2025? And the impact, we will have no government sitting at that point in time. Is there some provisions going to be in place to make that work and how that's going to look moving forward?
Thank you for your question. So I'll try to answer both of those
Thank
together. I do want to acknowledge your point. Gun crime in this country is extremely complex, and finding ways in which to be able to address it. There's not one simple method, one simple program that is going to address gun crime completely. There's a comprehensive approach that we are putting in place, whether it's dealing with communities directly through investments, the Building Safer Communities funds, investments and support to the RCMP and to CBSA to be able to address some of those challenges. So the firearms compensation program is certainly one part of a broader and more comprehensive program to be able to address gun crime in the country. I'll ask Commissioner Duham if he wants to add anything about the law enforcement aspects of gun crime. But on your second question around the amnesty order, as we are designing the program, and we are doing it, as I said, adhering to those principles, including how we prioritize public safety, which I think is partly your question, is how do we make sure that Canadians are safe throughout this program? So that is one of the most kind of compelling features of the program design, certainly. We are providing advice to government on how we intend to implement this, including how best to be able to meet the dates of the amnesty order as they're set out. So we will continue to provide that advice to government.
Thank you, Mr. Motts. We're moving over to the Liberals now. Excuse me. Ms. O'Connell, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner Kelly, I'll give you a chance to actually answer my question from before in terms of the previous regulations for prisoner reclassification in comparison to now and what some of those factors are that your team would consider.
Okay, so right now, the way it reads is the least restrictive measures, but people sometimes forget that there's a continuation of the sentence there. It's that are consistent with the protection of society, staff members, and inmates. And it respects a certain principle, just as the previous wording would have, which was necessary and proportionate to attain the purposes of the CCRA. So when we obviously assess offender for security reclassification, as you know, we have to use an actuarial tool. And depending if it's an admission, that's the custody rating scale. Later on, it's the security reclassification scale. And then our parole officers use their judgment and have to assess 3 criteria: institutional adjustment, the risk of escape, and the risk to the safety of the public. And those are actually outlined in the regulations. And the law requires CSC to assign a security classification to each offender.
Thank you, Commissioner Kelly. It's too bad the Conservatives weren't listening to that, because it's pretty crucial to what they've been talking about in the House, and having the facts actually might educate them on the criminal justice system, and certainly with corrections. I said earlier in my question about, I believe it was someone, it wasn't you, but there was a quote in the media, I believe from CSC, a representative of CSC, in particular in talking about the Bernardo transfer, and they said that the transfer itself, given the criteria that is looked at, that under the Conservatives would have still happened. So this performance that Conservatives talk tough, that under their regulations, transfers would never happen. Do you agree with the quote in the media from the CSC official who said, under previous language, the Bernardo transfer would have still gone through that criteria review and therefore the same criteria review and therefore happened under the previous language as well?
I would say so because in terms of the legislation, it dates back to 1992, where we have to assign an offender. In terms of the regulations, maximum, medium, minimum has been there. And the other thing I would say, in terms of the distribution of inmates in max, medium, minimum, I've looked at it, and for well over 10 years, it's been in maximum, it's up approximately 22% of the inmate population, in medium 63%, and in minimum 15%. And that has remained relatively constant for well over 10 years.
Thank you, Commissioner. I think it's important that Canadians understand how the incredible work that you all do to keep the community safe, the difficult decisions in making these reviews, and that politicians' performances can't possibly take into account the incredible work that your team is doing. It's not one individual, it's a team who makes these assessments to keep the public safe. And what often is lost in these debates, or not even debates, these talking at lectures from Conservatives who don't think about the safety of officers working in these facilities and the incredible risk that they take to keep Canadians safe, and that is a crucial element of these assessments. So thank you for clarifying to committee. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Madame Michaud, please, for 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Thank you, Chair. Mr. Duhem, thank you for your good service. It is well known in the public arena that the RCMP suspects some communities to be working for Beijing in Quebec, and commitments have been made to prevent foreign interference in Canada. What is the specific mandate given to the RCMP to do this? Thank you, Chair. First, the RCMP has the mandate to investigate everything that is foreign interference. We work closely with our international partners as well as with our partners across the country. We work jointly to investigate the threats and protect communities. And in this case, we had received public complaints. And the RCMP as an organization adopted an aggressive approach, sent police cars to the site and sharing with the diaspora in English and French and Mandarin to encourage citizens to come forward and to talk about what we were suspecting. I received a letter last week from an anonymous person to thank us for the work. That's just one person, but I'm sure that that individual is speaking on behalf of many others. Thank you. I'd like to come back to car theft. I was pleased to hear you say earlier that since mid-February, the exchange of information with Interpol is unfolding very well. The government announced that it had the intention to ban certain devices that help car thieves steal cars. And according to some experts, safety engineers, they're saying that that came out of nowhere. It's not going to change much on the ground to ban these kind of devices. Some are already banned in Canada. And so what do you have to say about this? Will it change anything? Mr. Chair, I'm not an expert in all of these electronic devices, but there was a symposium and we had a car insurance industry at the table. It's much bigger than just the RCMP. I'm sure that we can prevent stolen cars from leaving the country. We need to sit together and find solutions. Thank you.
Julian, please, for 2.5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur Vignon, I asked the question of the minister, given the rising and disturbing trend in far-right violence motivated by hate in 2022, 2023, every single ideologically motivated mass killing in North America was committed by far-right extremists manifesting hate towards a variety of groups. What measures are CSIS taking to counter that rising tide?
Merci, Monsieur le Président, and thank you, Mr. Julian, for the.
Thank you, Chair.
What you're describing, Mr. Julian, is one of the most significant evolution in terms of violence in not just in Canada but across the world. At CSIS and with our partners, we have done a lot of work both in terms of conceptually defining what is ideologically motivated violence, because it is morphing. It is, it is not just, people who are anti-immigration or who are anti-Semite or Islamophobe. It's also anti-authority. We've seen a number of the threat vectors increasing. And so from that point of view, CSIS, we're devoting, about 50% of our counterterrorism resources to address to investigate the threat of ideologically motivated violent extremism. And I would say that it is also more than just a CSIS or law enforcement or federal issue. The way we describe it is we use the analogy of a funnel. So if you look at the narrow end of the funnel, this is where CSIS, RCMP, we investigate, we engage in counterterrorism operations. But when you go up in the funnel, you may have criminal activity that would be hate speech, something that the criminal code may address. But the rest of the funnel, where you have the vast majority of the people there, it's protected speech by the charter. It's vile hate speech. It is, people who are engaging in radicalization, are identifying each other, and then are essentially being able to bring some of the most radical people and bring them into encrypted chat rooms where they are further radicalizing themselves. And this is where we see some of the individuals who are engaging in plots. And so we are, right now in Canada, we have people who are engaged in these activities, who are under active investigation by both the RCMP and the criminal side, but a number of national security investigations. And you're right to point out to the rise of this phenomenon in our country.
What are the tools that you need to really combat this rise, which seems to be fostered as well by foreign governments? So there's a tie, Putin's IRB promotes far-right hatred and targets individuals. So what are the tools that you need?
So very quickly, I would say that first we need to have a national discussion on this because, as I said, it is more than just a federal level. And from a CSIS point of view, it's all of the ability to get access to data. And the further previous line of questioning regarding the Supreme Court decision on Bekovitz is one that we are actively looking at, because the concerns we have is to be able to take those IP addresses and be able to, with the proper judicial authorization as required, but to be able to get to the actors and to be able to apply the tools that we have.
Thank you.
And so this is a very serious concern that
Thank
we're dealing
you.
with.
We're moving now. We're going to do 2 minutes for the Conservatives and 2 minutes for the Liberals, and then we're calling it a day. So, Mr. Caputo, you get 2 minutes. A hard stop.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, the following questions to Commissioner Kelly. Commissioner, the judge in the Bernardo case, and I'm not sure about the sentencing comments in Magnotta or Williams, but I'm sure they were the same. They said that these were people who were they could not be rehabilitated. They were sadistic, and the service has its own metrics on that. And yet they are routinely transferred to medium security. Does the CSC, do you view that as a just resolution?
So again, we have a rigorous process in place to assess the security classification of offenders, and I would say they are appropriately placed. I would also say that in maximum security, over 95% of the inmates that are there because they are a threat to the staff, they are a threat to the institution, and they are a threat to other inmates. That's who is in our maximum security institutions.
So just so I'm clear from what you said, you view it as appropriate that the likes of Magnotta, Bernardo, Williams, whomever, are appropriately held at maximum security. That is a just outcome given what their victims have gone through?
Obviously, my hearts go out to the victims whose lives have been changed forever by the heinous crimes that have been committed by these individuals. But again, we have a rigorous security classification process. In the Bernardo case, as you know, we did a full review. We did actually 2 reviews. And in the end, the reviews concluded that we had respected the laws and the policies.
Well, of course, and I mean, those laws we know who instituted those laws and those policies. So yes, the laws were followed. They just led to an unjust result.
Time's up, please. Ms. O'Connell for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Following up to Commissioner Kelly on that very point, when it comes to, you've made this point before, but for some reason, I guess conservatives don't want to be confused by the facts. But in terms of sentencing and the facilities themselves are not connected to sentences themselves. It's in and around the organization of the prison itself. And you identified that maximum security prisoners pose a threat to the safety of the correctional workers, to other inmates, but that where prisoners are held are not conditioned to sentencing. It's a condition of the corrections being able to control and contain and keep the public safe. Is that correct?
That's right. So when offenders come to us, we have a responsibility, like I said, to make an assessment on their security classification and ensure they are transferred to the appropriate institution based on a series of factors. So once we've assessed them, then we have to determine which institution is the best to meet the security requirements, interventions that are required, programs that are required.
And if it was truly a continuation of sentencing, wouldn't a former prosecutor know that sentencing and those decisions at the courts and what the prosecution can even ask for don't include facilities because it is strict? It is not a continuation of punishment. The punishment is the sentence itself, and
right.
This individual being removed from the community, and that is why it is left up to correctionals experts of how to take that individual and properly secure them away from the public and properly keep correctional service officers safe.
That's right. We administer the sentences imposed by the courts.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. O'Connell. Before we go any further, project budgets for committee approval. The clerk has distributed to members yesterday 2 project budgets regarding our meeting today, as well as 1064 meeting on March 11th. Do I have agreement from the committee to adopt these budgets?
Yes.
Good. We've also had a invitation from a Ukrainian delegation, excuse me. So what I think I'm going to do on this is allow the clerk to circulate it to members and get a decision on what you feel is appropriate. We do have a date and a time here, so I'll get him to do that. Also, an update on the visit of the Port of Montreal, and we're going around and round on this one, and I'd really like to get it settled for the clerk's effort on this. So the clerk has suggested that he work with the whips. And if that's okay, we'll do that. Okay. So witnesses today, I think sometimes we take you guys for granted for everything you do and all your staff you have, and we certainly appreciate your time here today and your professionalism. And we hope to see you back. Thank you so much. Motion to adjourn.
Thank you.